Welcome to the Bookman's Corner. I'm your host, Lois Lindstrom. Today we have a rare book, a biography of the CIA chief in Mexico City from 1956 to 1969, plus some genuine revelations about the crime of the 20th century, the assassination of President Kennedy that happened in Dallas on November 22, 1963. Our guest is acclaimed author Jefferson Morley, who wrote the book Our Man in Mexico, Winston Scott, and the Hidden History of the CIA. Jefferson Morley, welcome.
Thanks, Lois. Good to be here.
Great to have you. The CIA's station in Mexico City was the front line of the United States' fight against international communism, as important for Latin America as Berlin was for Europe. And the undisputed spy master was Winston McKinley Scott, who was the chief of the CIA Mexico City station. Win Scott ran hundreds of covert operations, including the surveillance of Lee Harvey Oswald during his visit to Mexico City just weeks before the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Our guest author, Jeff Morley, is a Washington-based journalist and historian specializing in U.S. intelligence and the assassination of President Kennedy. He is the author of JFK Facts on Substack and has several books on the CIA. He attended Yale University and was a writer for the Washington Post for 15 years. What or who inspired you to write your book, Our Man in Mexico, Winston Scott and the Hidden History of the CIA?
So it started with a phone call from a friend of mine, a lawyer here in town, Mark Zaid, who does a lot of national security law. And I was at the Washington Post at the time, and he said, Jeff, I got a client whose story is just a great story. You should write about it. And his client was Michael Scott, the son of Win Scott.
Okay.
And so Michael Scott was trying to find out more about his father, who had been the CIA's top man in Mexico in the 1960s, and was collecting information from family friends, from his parents, from his mother, and he did a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit to get records from the CIA about his father. So that was the introduction, and I met Michael Scott, and what was extraordinary, besides him being an extremely nice guy and a friend of mine to this day, was he had collected a lot of material on his father from his associates in CIA and also in MI6, the British intelligence. When I saw this material, I realized, it's very rare that outsiders would get to see this. And if I was a reporter going to these people, they might talk to me, but they might not.
That's right, that's right.
And so I realized he had this trove of material. So I wrote a piece for the Washington Post style section. But when I was done, I said, this is such a good story, I want to write a book about it. So I wrote a book about that, and but I couldn't really sell it. Because I'd say, well, this guy has really cool career, and this Kennedy assassination angle. And
but publishers were not interested, right?
Well, no, so they said, oh, that Kennedy assassination. Who killed Kennedy? I said, I don't know. Did he kill Kennedy? No, that's not the point of the story. It's not, it's a different kind of story. It's about this extraordinary character. So nobody wanted to buy it. So I put it aside. My agent couldn't sell it. And a few years later, that same attorney, Mark Zaid, ran into a book publisher at a conference. And the editor was going around and saying, do you know anybody who's got a book? And he said, oh, well, I know Jeff Morley wanted to write a book about Win Scott, and he couldn't sell it. That publisher was Mike Briggs. He was the editor-in-chief of University of Kansas Press. He called me up and said, do you want to write this book? I said, well, I'll just send you the proposal. I hadn't looked at it in years. But And he got back to me and said, we'd love to publish it.
And of course, this was in around 2008. That's when the book was published, right?
This conversation happened in about 2005, 2006, and it took me 2 years.
To write the book, right.
Yeah, so then I went to Mexico, interviewed a lot more people, used the material that Michael gave me,
And Michael gave you a lot of names and addresses and things. That's very cool. Now, your book does unravel intrigues about the Lee Harvey Oswald and the Kennedy assassination in 1963, because Oswald visited Mexico City when Winston Scott was the CIA chief there, just before Oswald headed to Dallas and shot Kennedy. Can you tell us more about that?
So one of the things that interested me about the whole story, Win Scott was an extraordinary person and had a very interesting career in many ways, but I knew full well he had been in charge of the CIA station in Mexico when Oswald, the ex-Marine, visited there about 6 weeks before Kennedy's assassination. And so Win Scott was in charge of the surveillance of the Cuban embassy and the Soviet embassy, which Oswald visited. He was trying to get a visa to go to Cuba and then to the Soviet Union. So Win Scott saw all of that. What it turned out in the book, what I found out when I did the book, was that Win Scott objected to something that was in the Warren Commission report.
What was that?
It was a line which said the U.S. government, didn't say CIA, but the authorities is the way they put it, didn't know that Oswald had visited the Cuban embassy in Mexico City. It said they only figured that out afterwards.
And you don't believe that?
Win Scott didn't believe it, and he wrote down that it wasn't true.
Right.
It's not true.
Yeah, right.
Period, the end. It's
Yes.
not a matter of my opinion. Win Scott was there. He was in charge of the surveillance.
And he would, yeah.
And he said, we had that embassy covered all the time with photographic and audio surveillance. And so the CIA had told the Warren Commission something that wasn't true, and Win Scott knew it wasn't true. And Win Scott wrote this in a memoir that he was going to publish. In this memoir, which was not published in his lifetime, he said that the Warren Commission report was not true, and he also said that he didn't believe the official story that one man alone had killed the president. He felt that there had been some kind of plot or conspiracy. That's Win Scott, a CIA insider.
Yes.
You know, not somebody who's like out to criticize the CIA. So that was an extraordinary admission, and that's one of the kind of the key points in this is when you reconstruct what happened, Win Scott was absolutely right. His surveillance, both photographic, audio, and human intelligence was in effect. They did know about Oswald, and they did try to hide it because they didn't want to explain what was going on.
Right.
They didn't want to explain just how closely they were watching this guy who supposedly shot the president.
Yes, and it raises a lot of questions, actually.
Yes.
Now, describe Winston Scott, as you wrote, was a legendary spy master. And you explain his humble origins in rural Alabama to being the right-hand man of CIA Director Allen Dulles, who inspired the name Dulles Airport near Washington, D.C. I mean, very powerful man.
Yeah, so somebody once said about the CIA that it was composed of scions of the Ivy League and men who were one generation from the plow. and that's true. People know that the CIA was very much, especially in its early years, not so much now, was very much, you know, sort of dominated. That its personnel came from the Ivy League, from Harvard, Princeton, Yale. But this man was saying there were also these other people in the CIA who came out of nowhere and rose to positions of power, and that was Win Scott. Win Scott's father was tended a stretch of railroad in Alabama, and he lived beside the railroad that his father, the stretch of track that his father was responsible for. And early in life, his house was a abandoned boxcar.
Oh my gosh!
I mean, so he came from very humble circumstances. Went to University of Alabama, excelled in his studies. Went to University of Michigan and got a PhD in math.
Fantastic.
And it was that he got that in 1940, and he was applied for a job at the FBI and got it. Was sent to Havana, where the FBI had an outpost, and that was the track that he was on. He committed some infraction that offended J. Edgar Hoover, and he was going to be sent to Cleveland.
Oh dear.
So he was living in Havana and liking it, nice sunny place, and he was headed for Cleveland, and he said, forget it, I'm out. And so he was in Washington trying to think what to do, and he ran into a guy who said, why don't you apply for the Office of Strategic Services, the wartime intelligence agency.
Sure.
This is 1943. Win Scott wanted to be part of the war effort, so he goes into the OSS. And he really excels there. He goes into OSS training school in England, first in Virginia, then in England. He works at the OSS headquarters in London. And
this goes on from there.
I mean, the OSS didn't turn into the CIA for a couple of years in the immediate demobilization of the war, but he becomes the first chief of station in London.
Yes.
So he's very close with the leaders of British intelligence, and he's very well thought of in Washington. So he holds that job for a while, but he gets tired of the Washington office politics.
Sure.
And he's not from the Ivy League.
Sure.
And he realizes that since he doesn't have that pedigree, there's a lot of people in line ahead of him if he's looking to go to the top. So he asked Dulles, and Dulles says, pick any station in the world that you want. And Scott, remembering Havana, says, how about Mexico City? And Dulles says, it's yours.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
And so
but the important thing, when we say he's a legend, the thing to understand is he then held that job for 13 years.
yeah, that's incredible, because most of people don't do that. Most ambassadors.
Right. Typically, a station chief will stay in a job for 2, 3, 4 years.
Right.
Maybe if there's a war going on, it might be 5, but very rare beyond that. He was there for 13 years.
That's amazing. That is a legend. That's
Yeah.
right. Well, you wrote that when he was there and he worked at the American Embassy in Mexico City, no one knew that he was the CIA station chief.
Winston Scott writes affectingly at the end in that memoir that was suppressed about what a relief he felt when he didn't have to live a life of deception anymore.
Right, right.
And he talks about the psychological toll that it takes on you.
Yes.
And it's very candid, and psychologically, I think it's very astute about what living a life of lies, what it really does to you. And he said, it makes you crazy.
I bet it does. I bet it does.
And he was saying what a relief it was. So, he was an attractive person to write about, and he was up to his eyeballs in some dirty deeds as well. There's no necessary contradiction there, and I hope the book presents him fully.
I think it does present him as a nice guy. I do think that, but
Yeah.
I mean, a very serious guy. I mean, very competent.
Yeah.
And then the other thing was he did run hundreds of covert spy operations from his headquarters in the U.S. Embassy in Mexico, while keeping 3 Mexican presidents on the CIA payroll. That was pretty interesting.
Yeah. So what happened was when Scott was first introduced to the Mexican president in 1958, it was Adolfo López Mateos. Mexican presidents serve only one 6-year term.
Okay.
This is kind of a bulwark against dictatorship. So López Mateos was introduced to him, and Scott became friends with him, and he had a kind of contact person. So that was the first person who. Then López Mateos had a Secretary of the Interior named Gustavo Díaz Ordaz. It's called Gobernación in Spanish, but it's the equivalent of an interior ministry.
Okay.
Domestic security. And he became even better friends with Díaz Ordaz. And in fact, when Díaz Ordaz became president, Winston Scott was one of the first people to know that he was going to be named the next Mexican president. And Díaz Ordaz became in CIA cables known as Lee Tempo 2. Lee, L-I, stood for an operation related to Mexico.
Okay.
Tempo is just a arbitrarily chosen noun. And then a number refers to how many people are involved in that program. So the Lee Tempo program eventually encompassed about 14 senior Mexican government officials. López Mateos was one, Gustavo Díaz Ordaz was another, and then Luis Echeverria, who succeeded Díaz Ordaz in 1968, was also a good friend of Winston Scott's. And when I say these men were friends, I mean, Janet Scott would have dinner parties at her house, and she would have a guest book and have people sign them. Michael showed me the guest book. There was Díaz Ordaz. There was Luis Echeverria.
All the top officials in the Mexican government basically were coming.
Yeah, they wouldn't all come at once, but he was that. He came to that party.
Yes.
Fernando Gutierrez Barrios was the head of the DFS.
So it was very good for Winston Scott because he was able to get information from a lot of different people about what was going on.
This was why the CIA wanted to keep him there. I mean, at one point, the ambassador was very, upset about this because people wouldn't talk to the ambassador because they knew the CIA guy had more power. And so Fulton Freeman was the ambassador, and he protested to the State Department, and the State Department said, let's go to the White House, And he said, look, I have to handle the state-to-state relations with the president, not the head of the CIA station chief. And they took it to LBJ, and LBJ, I could never quite nail this story down, but I'm pretty sure, LBJ said, Win Scott's my boy there in Mexico, and
I like him.
And any way he wants to do it is how we're going to do it.
How we're going to do it, all right. You know, I read in your book that Angleton not only covered up the agency's interest in Lee Harvey Oswald, but after Win Scott died, he absconded with the only copies of Scott's unpublished memoir. I mean, how did he get his dead friend's memoir, which was Scott's, and what was Scott's wife's reaction to this?
So Win Scott died in April 1971, suddenly, had a heart attack at the breakfast table, slumped over and never regained consciousness. When James Angleton heard that, he immediately got on the next plane to Mexico. I think he was there by the following morning.
Wow.
And he took the current station chief, the guy who had succeeded Win, and they went to the Scott's home. And Janet Scott opened the door. She did not like Jim Angleton. Her husband and Angleton were friends, but also rivals.
Okay.
You know, these are super powerful guys. They guard their turf.
Sure.
And they poach on the other guy's turf. So there was some tension between Win Scott and Jim Angleton, and Janet Scott did not like Angleton at all. But Angleton was a very clever and ruthless man, and he made a quick reference to, we wouldn't want to have any problem with Win's pension, would we?
Ooh.
And you know, he said, so, you know, we got to make sure that that's all right. And she got the message.
And he wanted that memoir in his hands, didn't he?
Yeah, and so they went in, and he and the other guy, John Horton, they came away with 4 cartons, 4 boxes of material, and 3 suitcases.
Incredible.
Filled with material.
You wrote that after America went to war, the FBI was charged with keeping track of Germans in Latin America, and Scott was tasked with looking for Germans in Havana. Who did he hang out with in Cuba?
You know, they knew Ernest Hemingway, who was there then.
They did.
Well, one of the things, Hemingway came to them and said, I'm out sailing all the time. Should I look for German submarines? And they said, yeah. You know,
yeah, good idea.
That's one of the things that we're
concerned about.
That we're concerned about.
But he does land a job in the organization that predates the CIA and is sent to London to learn about intelligence gathering from the best in the world at the time.
Right.
And he excels at breaking codes for the British during World War II.
Win Scott had a background in mathematics, so he had some code-breaking skills. He never had a code-breaking assignment.
Oh, he didn't? Okay.
No, that was not his specialty. He was an all-round intelligence officer, and he would have had some special insight into code-breaking, but that was not his assignment in London.
And then tell us about Win's love affair in London with an Irish woman named Paula, although he had a child and a wife back in Alabama. And how did he manage to see Paula while his wife Bessie joined him in London?
Well, yeah, Win was juggling two women at that point. His first wife was from Alabama, was still back in the States, and had a son. But he met this woman, Paula, and was madly in love with her. I found a lot of letters. He got the divorce from Bessie and married Paula. Yeah.
Okay. Well, tell us about Win's activities in the failed attempt of the U.S. government's efforts to kill Castro in Cuba during the Bay of Pigs.
Win Scott supported the CIA invasion at the Bay of Pigs. One of the things that he used the Mexican presidency for was he got the Mexican president to donate oil for the ships that were going to be used to go from Guatemala, which is where they were training the invaders, to Cuba. So the oil for the ships was given by the Mexican president, and Win had set that up. He wasn't involved in the efforts to assassinate Castro, but that's how he supported the Bay of Pigs invasion. He also supported when those CIA-funded anti-Castro people were in Mexico. He tried to help them. He tried to protect them. It didn't work out very well because the Mexicans were very pro-Castro.
Let's go back to when Winston Scott met Lee Harvey Oswald months before he assassinates President Kennedy.
Oswald was in Mexico City from September 30th to October 2nd.
Okay.
So in that time, he visited the Cuban consulate in an effort to get the visa. So the CIA has a pulse camera that's looking at the door where you walk in.
Okay.
And every time the door opens, it takes a picture. It's a motion sensor.
Okay.
And so Oswald goes in, he wants a visa, he wants to go to Cuba and the Soviet Union. And he's told, well, if you're going to the Soviet Union, you have to get that visa first. and then you can get a visa from us, as long as we know that you're passing through the country. So he leaves the door. That's the second time the Poles came. He goes to the Soviet embassy 6 blocks away, talks to them, and they say, no, you can't get it, you have to apply in Washington. He goes back to the Cuban consulate, goes in the door, another chance for the picture to be taken. Oh, and same thing at the Soviet embassy. There's a camera that's taking a picture of every person. The one at the Soviet embassy is manned by a person. It's not automatic.
Okay.
The one at the Cuban consulate is. So he goes out and he tells them, he lies to them and says, they're getting the visa ready. Can you get my visa ready? And they say, well, we'll wait to hear from them. And they quickly figure out that he's lying because they know that that's the procedure. So he goes out and he comes back. So he goes in and out 3 times there. He goes to the Soviet embassy, in and out. And then on Monday, somebody calls the Soviet embassy and says, my name is Oswald, do you know about my visa request? So he's recorded on the phone. His picture is taken coming and going at both places. And then the CIA story is the cameras weren't working and we never got a picture.
They're lying, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. They definitely,
Why are they lying, you think?
Because there's a covert operation going on and they have to pretend that they're ignorant of it.
I see. And what is the covert operation, you think?
Well, since Oswald's arrested for killing the president, it could be a covert operation to kill the president. It could be something else, you know. I mean,
of course, Oswald's killed too. I mean,
yeah. So it's some kind of operation to manipulate Oswald.
Didn't Oswald have a Cuban girlfriend?
The woman who was in the front desk of this Cuban embassy was a Mexican woman, civilian employee of the Cuban embassy named Sylvia Duran.
Sylvia, yeah.
And the CIA had targeted her, trying to recruit her as a spy. And one of the things that they said was she really likes Americans. So one thing you could do is, you know, try and get her in bed with an American. But they definitely were targeting her, and with this idea of, you know, some kind of sexual blackmail, you know, blackmailing her or blackmailing somebody else or recruiting her. Right after the assassination, the Mexican police pick up
that woman,
Sylvia Duran, and question her. And one of the things they say is, did you sleep with Lee Harvey Oswald? And she says no. And, you know, they torture her. They beat her up.
Oh, God.
Yeah, it was terrible. And she denied it all. There was never any, like, there's no transcript of the interrogation. And a few months later, 6 months later, when the Warren Commission comes to town and they say, we want to talk to her, Wynn goes to one of his lead tempo agents, Luis Echeverria, later the president, at that point, a high cabinet official.
Sure, in Mexico, yeah.
And he makes sure that they never see her. Nobody wanted to know her story.
Did the CIA cut Winston Scott out of the loop of the agency's latest reporting on Lee Harvey Oswald before President Kennedy was killed?
Yes, they did.
Why?
Well, we'll get to that. But what happened was somebody named Oswald shows up at these Cuban and Soviet embassies, and somebody's overheard calling the Soviet embassy and saying, my name is Lee Oswald and I'm asking you about my visa request. Do you have any more information? So Wynn sends a cable to Washington and says, who is Lee Oswald? Do we know anything about him? And so he gets the answer back 2 days later. Lee Oswald was a Marine who defected to the Soviet Union. He married a Russian woman. He returned. His time in the Soviet Union has had a maturing effect on him. And that's what they told him. Now, what they left out was what they knew about Oswald after his return to the United States, what had happened in the year and a half since then. And it was significant.
Sure.
He had moved to New Orleans. He'd gotten into a fight with Cubans who were paid by the CIA. He'd been arrested. He was known, his landlord said that he beat his wife. While he was in, the person who answered the phone in the Soviet consulate was believed to be a KGB officer.
Okay.
None of that was reported to Winston Scott. And that had to be deliberate.
Yes.
Because it was sitting on the desk of the people in Washington. They were looking at an FBI report on his arrest, and they didn't say anything. So you ask why? Well, if you're running a covert operation, you don't want to disrupt it. If Winston Scott had known that Lee Oswald had been arrested and had been in touch with a KGB officer, he would have done something.
Of course.
And that would have wrecked the covert operation that was going on. So what this hands-off attitude tells you is they're watching him, to do something that they want him to do. They're not like surprised, and they're not worried about him, being a threat to anybody. They have some other purpose for Oswald, and they don't tell Winston Scott. And this is why he's suspicious afterwards, because he realizes, like,
I'm not in the loop, that's right.
yeah, I'm not in the loop. And I believe, and I say in the book, I believe the reason he wrote that, he started writing the book in 1969, right when Jim Garrison was bringing his charges, which were not ever, proven. But I think that he wrote that book when he saw that line in the Warren Commission about, like, somebody didn't, screwed up and didn't capture Oswald.
Now, how did Michael, Wynn's son, help you write this book?
Well, first of all, he just cooperated with me.
Mm-hmm.
There was this very superficial investigation called the Warren Commission report.
Very superficial then?
Very superficial.
Okay.
I mean, and all of this story about, what was not, well, first of all, that there was outright false statements about Oswald in Mexico City in the Warren report. But also, the Warren report was written with the goal of convicting Lee Harvey Oswald. It wasn't written with the goal of investigating the crime.
You're right about that, yeah.
Nobody was ever seriously considered as a suspect. But the questions arose immediately, and there were these questions about Sylvia Duran. Did she have an affair? A guy who was working in the U.S. Embassy in Mexico at the time, a couple years later, got interested in this story and started investigating it, and felt that it was true that Duran and Oswald had some kind of fling, and they had met at a party while he was there, and people had seen Oswald at this party, and they wanted, this guy, Charles Thomas, wanted the story to be known. Well, Wynn did not want to he wanted to satisfy himself about who killed Kennedy, but he didn't want to deal with anybody else. He didn't want to report this to Washington. And so at one point he writes, it may be true that Oswald had relations with Sylvia Duran, but it's all besides the point now. Like, Wynn just wanted to bury it. He just wanted to get rid of it.
Right. We have to come to an end now. It's been a wonderful time talking with you, and been wonderful having you on our program. And where can our viewers find your book if they would like to purchase it?
You can buy the book. The best way to buy the book is the University Press of Kansas website.
Thank you for watching. Please join us again next month for a new edition of the Bookman's Corner. I'm Lois Lindstrom.